Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to a place where the air itself can kill you in minutes, where your eyelashes freeze together when you blink, and where the thermometer once dropped so low that it shattered, literally shattered, because the mercury inside froze solid. We're heading to Yakutia in eastern Siberia, specifically to the villages around Oymyakon and Verkhoyansk, the coldest permanently inhabited places on planet Earth. Imagine stepping outside and feeling the moisture in your nostrils freeze instantly with a soft, crackling sound. Imagine breathing air so cold it feels like inhaling tiny shards of glass. Imagine a world where minus 40 degrees Celsius is considered a mild winter day, where children still go to school at minus 50 degrees Celsius, and where the official record sits at a bone-shattering minus 71.2 degrees Celsius. That's minus 96 degrees Fahrenheit for those keeping track. At that temperature, you probably won't survive more than a few minutes without proper gear, and even with it, you're playing a very dangerous game with physics itself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm genuinely curious if anyone's listening from somewhere even remotely as cold as where we're heading tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in Yakutsk, the regional capital, in mid-January. The flight from Moscow took 6 hours eastward, crossing 7 time zones, and as the plane descends, you press your face against the window to see a landscape that looks like the surface of another planet. Everything is white, not the cheerful white of a Christmas card, but a hostile, endless white that seems to erase the boundary between earth and sky. The forests below look like tiny black needles poking through a white sheet that stretches to every horizon. As the wheels touch down, the pilot's voice crackles over the intercom with a temperature reading, minus 52 degrees Celsius. The woman next to you, a local returning from vacation, notices your wide eyes and laughs. "This is nothing," she says in accented English. "Wait until February." The airport terminal feels almost tropical by comparison. A balmy minus 15 degrees Celsius inside. You can see your breath, but at least your face doesn't hurt. Through the windows, you watch ground crew moving with practiced efficiency, their faces completely covered except for narrow slits for their eyes. They look like Arctic ninjas. Their movements are deliberate, unhurried, because rushing in extreme cold makes you sweat, and sweat in Yakutia is a death sentence. The moisture freezes against your skin, creating a layer of ice that saps your body heat with terrifying efficiency. Outside, you take your first breath of true Yakutian air, and it's like nothing you've ever experienced. The cold doesn't just surround you, it invades you. It rushes into your nose, down your throat, and seems to crystallize in your lungs. You instinctively gasp, which is exactly the wrong thing to do, and the frigid air triggers a coughing fit. Your guide, a stocky Saka man named Mikhail, grins beneath his fur-lined hood. "Breathe through your nose," he instructs. "Small breaths. Let the air warm up a little before it reaches your lungs." You try it, and while it's still uncomfortable, like breathing frozen sandpaper, it's manageable. Sort of. The cold here has a presence, almost a personality. It's not like winter back home, wherever home might be for you. This cold is aggressive, intelligent, opportunistic. It finds every gap in your clothing, every exposed millimeter of skin, every weakness in your defenses. Within 30 seconds, you feel it creeping through the seams of your jacket. Within a minute, your fingers start to ache despite your gloves. Within 2 minutes, your face begins to hurt. A deep, bone-level hurt that makes you wonder if this is what frostbite feels like. It is, by the way. That's exactly what's beginning to happen. Mikhail leads you to a vehicle that looks like it's been modified for a Mars mission. A Russian UAZ van that's been winterized within an inch of its life. Extra insulation, double-paned windows, and an engine block heater that stays plugged in whenever the vehicle isn't moving. You never turn off the engine in winter, Mikhail explains as you climb inside. If you do, the oil freezes, the antifreeze freezes, everything freezes. Then you need a fire to thaw it out before you can start it again. The interior of the van is wonderfully warm, the heater blasting at full power, and you begin to understand the precious, almost sacred nature of heat in this environment. As you drive through Yakutsk, population roughly 350,000, You see a city that has learned to exist in spite of physics. Every building sits on stilts, concrete pillars that elevate the structures 1 to 2 meters off the ground. This isn't an aesthetic choice. It's pure survival engineering. Yakutsk sits on permafrost that extends down over 1,500 meters in some places. If you build directly on the ground, the heat from the building melts the permafrost beneath it, and the structure slowly sinks into the resulting mud, tilting and eventually collapsing. The stilts allow freezing air to circulate underneath, keeping the permafrost frozen and stable. It's one of humanity's cleverer adaptations to an environment that really doesn't want us here. The pipes, water, sewage, heating, run above ground in insulated boxes that look like elevated tunnels snaking between buildings. Underground pipes would freeze and burst, so Yakutsk's infrastructure is completely visible, creating a strange industrial aesthetic where the city's circulatory system is worn on the outside like mechanical veins. Steam rises from joints and valves, creating ghostly plumes that hang in the air. Everything looks slightly science fiction, slightly post-apocalyptic. You notice people moving on the streets, bundled in furs and modern technical fabrics, their breath creating clouds that linger long after they've passed. Children waddle to school in so many layers they can barely bend their arms. A group of teenagers stands at a bus stop, somehow looking simultaneously miserable and completely adapted, the way teenagers everywhere manage to look both put upon and invincible. Historians still argue whether humans initially settled this region by choice or by necessity, pushed ever eastward by conflicts and migrations. But one thing is certain. The people who stayed developed a culture uniquely suited to extreme cold, blending indigenous wisdom with Soviet-era engineering and modern technology. Your destination isn't Yakutsk itself, though. You're heading to Oymyakon, a village about 920 kilometers northeast, where the cold reaches its absolute peak. The drive will take roughly 20 hours in good conditions, which means clear roads, no blizzards, and no mechanical breakdowns. We stop in Kandaiga tonight, Mikhail says, settling in for the long drive. No one drives to Oymyakon without stopping. Too dangerous. As the city falls away behind you, replaced by an endless corridor of larch forest and white emptiness, you begin to understand scale. Yakutia, officially the Sakha Republic, is enormous, roughly the size of India, but with a population of less than 1 million. It's one of the most sparsely populated places on Earth, and as the kilometers unspool beneath the van's wheels, you see why. This is land that actively resists human habitation. The cold isn't a seasonal visitor here. It's a permanent resident, the dominant force that shapes every decision, every structure, every moment of life. The Kolyma Highway, nicknamed the Road of Bones, for the grim reason that it was built partially by Gulag prisoners whose remains are supposedly mixed into its foundation, stretches ahead like a pale ribbon. In summer, portions of it turn to impassable mud. In winter, it becomes one of the coldest roads in the world, a route where breaking down can mean death if you're unprepared. Mikhail drives with complete focus, eyes scanning for any sign of ice, mechanical trouble, or other vehicles that might need help. Out here, drivers help each other without question. It's not kindness, it's survival math. Today you help someone, tomorrow someone helps you. Every hour or so, Mikhail pulls over to check the engine to make sure nothing is freezing, to verify that all systems are functioning. You step out with him once, and the cold is somehow even more shocking than before. There's nothing here. No buildings, no people, just forest and snow and a cold so profound it seems to have weight. The silence is absolute except for the ticking of the cooling engine and the soft creak of frozen trees contracting in the cold. Your breath doesn't just fog. It crystallizes and falls, creating a tiny localized snowfall around your head. It's weirdly beautiful and utterly terrifying. Back in the van, you ask Mikhail why anyone lives here. He thinks for a moment, his weathered face thoughtful. "Why does anyone live anywhere?" he finally says. "This is home. My grandfather was born here. My father, me, my children. We know how to live with the cold. City people, Moscow people, they think we suffer. But we have everything we need. Community, purpose. We're tough." He grins. Besides, summer here is beautiful. 3 months of sunshine, everything green, warm, Well, warm for us. 20, 25 degrees. Paradise. You do the mental math. 20 to 25 degrees Celsius is roughly room temperature elsewhere. Here, it's paradise. The scale of adaptation required to consider this region home starts to sink in. These aren't people merely surviving in a hostile environment. They're thriving, building lives, raising families, finding joy in a place where the thermometer sometimes reads lower than the surface temperature of Mars. A road sign appears, Candiga 340 kilometers. Mikhail nods with satisfaction. We make good time. No problems. As the winter sun, which barely clears the horizon even at midday in January, begins its brief arc across the southern sky, you settle deeper into your seat. The heater hums. The engine rumbles. The frozen world slides past the windows. And you're only beginning to understand what cold really means, how it shapes not just the landscape but the people, the culture, the very essence of life in the place where winter never truly loosens its grip. The thermometer on the dashboard reads -56 degrees Celsius. Mikhail glances at it and shrugs. Mild, he says. Very mild. And somehow, impossibly, you're starting to believe him. The science of extreme cold is both elegant and brutal, a demonstration of physics at its most unforgiving. As you continue the journey toward Oymyakon, Mikhail begins explaining what's actually happening to your body, to the air around you, to the materials of the van itself. Cold is just molecules slowing down, he says, which is technically true but dramatically understates the chaos that slowdown creates. At -71 degrees Celsius, the temperature recorded in Oymyakon in 1924, though some locals insist it's gotten colder since, dropping to -82 degrees Celsius in an unverified measurement. You're experiencing conditions that push the absolute limits of human survival. Your body is a furnace that operates within an absurdly narrow temperature range. Your core temperature needs to stay around 37 degrees Celsius to keep all your cellular machinery functioning. Drop just a few degrees to 35 degrees Celsius, and you enter mild hypothermia, shivering, confusion, loss of coordination. Drop to 32 degrees Celsius, and you stop shivering entirely, which sounds nice but is actually terrifying because shivering is your body's emergency heat generation system. Below 28 degrees Celsius, your heart starts to develop fatal arrhythmias, essentially forgetting how to beat properly. The gap between alive and functional and dead is less than 10 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, the air outside is 71 degrees below zero. The temperature differential between your core and the environment is over 100 degrees. Your body is desperately trying to maintain a tropical microclimate while surrounded by conditions cold enough to freeze carbon dioxide into dry ice. Every breath you take, every millimeter of exposed skin, every gap in your clothing is a potential catastrophic heat leak. You are, thermodynamically speaking, utterly screwed without serious intervention. The air itself becomes strange at these temperatures. Water vapor, which normally makes up a small percentage of the atmosphere, can't exist as a gas anymore. It crystallizes instantly into ice fog, creating those clouds you see forming with every breath. These aren't water droplets like in normal fog. They're actual ice crystals suspended in the air. When you breathe, you're essentially creating your own tiny, personal blizzard. Walk through a crowd on a -60 degrees Celsius day in Yakutsk, and the street becomes a river of ice fog as hundreds of people exhale frozen clouds that linger and mix. Is beautiful, surreal, and a visible reminder that you're operating at the edge of what chemistry allows. Mikhail tells you about steel. In normal cold, what you might call winter, steel is fine, strong, reliable. Here, steel becomes brittle, can shatter like glass. This isn't an exaggeration. At extreme cold, the crystalline structure of metal changes. Steel loses its ductility, its ability to bend and flex, and becomes fragile. Tools break. Vehicle parts crack. There's a reason traditional Saka and Evenki people used bone, horn, and carefully selected woods for many tools. They understood intuitively what materials engineers later proved with science. Historians still argue whether indigenous peoples developed this knowledge through systematic experimentation or tragic trial and error, but the result was the same. A deep material wisdom about what survives and what fails in the deep cold. The van itself is a testament to adaptation. The fuel is a special Arctic blend, Regular diesel would gel into useless sludge at these temperatures, forming wax crystals that clog fuel lines. The battery is wrapped in insulation and connected to a small heater because chemical reactions slow down in cold, and a frozen battery produces almost no current. The tires are specially formulated to remain flexible. Normal rubber would become hard and crack. Every fluid, oil, transmission fluid, brake fluid, has been replaced with low-temperature variants. The van is less a vehicle and more a carefully orchestrated collection of compromises, each one designed to postpone the inevitable moment when physics wins. You pass a broken-down truck on the side of the road, hood open, a small fire burning underneath the engine. 3 men stand around it, feeding the flames with wood. They didn't plug in the block heater, Mikhail observes, or it failed. Now they warm the engine enough to start it. This is standard procedure. Build a fire under your vehicle until the frozen oil thins enough to flow, until the engine block warms enough that the pistons can actually move. It's a scene that could be from 100 years ago, except the truck is modern and the men are wearing technical fabrics. Old solutions for ancient problems. Your body's response to cold is a cascade of increasingly desperate measures. First, vasoconstriction, blood vessels in your extremities constrict, reducing blood flow to your fingers, toes, nose, ears. This is strategic sacrifice. By reducing circulation to the periphery, your body keeps warm blood circulating around your vital organs. Your hands and feet become cold not because your body has failed, but because it's succeeding at prioritizing core temperature over peripheral comfort. Unfortunately, this also makes frostbite much easier. Reduced blood flow means reduced warmth, and tissue starts to freeze. Frostbite itself is a precise and horrifying process. Ice crystals form between cells first, drawing water out of the cells through osmosis, dehydrating them. The cells shrink and their membranes rupture. Then ice forms inside the cells themselves, the crystals physically tearing through cellular machinery. Blood vessels become damaged, leading to clots and further tissue death. In superficial frostbite, you get the famous waxy, white appearance as surface tissue freezes. In deep frostbite, everything freezes: skin, fat, muscle, potentially down to the bone. Tissue that's been severely frostbitten often dies and turns black, requiring amputation. And here's the cruel part. Frostbite often doesn't hurt when it's happening. The cold numbs the nerves. You might not realize you've been injured until you warm up and the pain screams into existence. Mikhail holds up his right hand, showing you 3 fingers that end at the first knuckle. Diesel fuel, he says matter-of-factly. 20 years ago, changing a fuel filter barehanded. Diesel soaked through my gloves. Evaporative cooling plus the cold. Frostbite in maybe 1 minute. Lost the fingers but kept the hand. He flexes the remaining fingers and thumb. Could have been worse. I was lucky. His tone is completely casual, the way someone else might describe a paper cut. In Yakutia, frostbite injuries are so common they barely register as noteworthy. Everyone has a story or knows someone who does. The shivering you experienced when you first stepped outside is your body's metabolic furnace kicking into high gear. Muscles contract and relax rapidly, generating heat through friction and increased metabolism. At peak shivering, your body can increase heat production by about 5 times. But shivering is expensive. It burns through calories and glucose at an incredible rate. This is why the traditional sake diet is so heavy in fat and protein, why reindeer meat, fish, and mare's milk are staples. You need dense calories to fuel the furnace. Carbohydrates alone won't cut it when you're burning through energy just to stay alive. There's a quirk of extreme cold that Mikhail finds funny. Alcohol. Tourists think vodka keeps you warm, he says, chuckling. Vodka kills you, makes you feel warm because it dilates blood vessels, brings warm blood to your skin. Feels nice, but you're just dumping heat into the environment faster. Drink vodka outside in real cold, you die comfortable and stupid. It's a common misconception worldwide. The St. Bernard with a brandy cask rescuing avalanche victims is pure fiction. Alcohol is a vasodilator that accelerates heat loss. In Yakutia, where heat is literally life, drinking before going outside is borderline suicidal. You notice your own body's responses as you occasionally step out at rest stops. There's a strange pain in your forehead, a dull ache that pulses with each heartbeat. Mikhail nods knowingly. Ice cream headache, but worse. Cold air cools the blood vessels in your sinuses. They constrict, then dilate. Your brain interprets it as pain. It's the same mechanism as eating ice cream too fast, except it's continuous, unrelenting. Some people develop chronic headaches from living in extreme cold. Others adapt, their bodies somehow learning to manage the vascular dance more efficiently. The moisture in your breath is a constant problem. Wear a scarf over your face, which seems sensible, and your breath freezes into the fabric, creating a sheet of ice that actually conducts heat away from your face faster than no scarf at all. The solution is counterintuitive. Breathe through a specially designed face mask with a breathing chamber that allows exhaled air to warm incoming air without freezing. Or breathe through a fur ruff, positioned so your breath escapes downward rather than freezing against your face. The indigenous peoples figured this out centuries before anyone understood the thermodynamics involved. Modern expedition gear has essentially reinvented traditional Saka and Evenki cold weather designs. Your eyes present a unique problem. They can't be covered completely, you need to see, but they're vulnerable. At extreme cold, tears freeze almost instantly. Blink, and your eyelashes can freeze together, glued shut by ice. The solution is to blink slowly and consciously, and to wear goggles in the worst cold. But goggles fog up from your body heat, then the fog freezes, blinding you anyway. It's a constant battle of managing moisture, heat, and visibility. There's no perfect solution, only a series of imperfect compromises. The cold also plays havoc with technology in ways you wouldn't expect. LCD screens freeze, becoming sluggish or stopping entirely. Lithium-ion batteries in your phone, your camera, any modern device drain in minutes because chemical reactions slow dramatically in cold. Mikhail keeps his phone inside his jacket, against his body, only pulling it out for brief moments to make calls. 5 minutes outside in your pocket, and it's dead, he says. Keep it warm, keep it alive. Even mechanical watches can fail as lubricants thicken and parts contract. There's a fascinating and terrifying phenomenon called cold-induced urticaria that some people experience. Essentially, they're allergic to cold. Their skin breaks out in hives when exposed to low temperatures, and in severe cases, they can go into anaphylactic shock. Imagine being literally allergic to the environment you live in. Most people with this condition move away, but Mikhail knows a woman in Yakutsk who manages it with antihistamines and careful layering. She's stubborn, he says with evident admiration. Refuses to leave. This is home. The thermodynamics of shelter become critical. Heat rises, which everyone knows, but in extreme cold, this creates dangerous temperature gradients. In a poorly insulated home, the temperature at ceiling level might be 20 degrees Celsius, while at floor level it's 5 degrees Celsius. Children playing on the floor can become dangerously cold while adults standing feel comfortable. Modern Yakutian homes combat this with forced air circulation and radiant floor heating, but traditional Saka dwellings use different strategies. Low ceilings, central heating sources, everyone sleeping on raised platforms where the warm air collected. Frostbite's nasty cousin, hypothermia, is the slower killer. As your core temperature drops, you first become confused and clumsy. Your brain isn't getting enough warmth to function properly. Then comes paradoxical undressing, where victims become convinced they're overheating and start removing clothing. This happens because the muscles controlling vasoconstriction become exhausted, blood vessels dilate, and a sudden rush of cold blood from the extremities to the core creates a false sensation of warmth. Rescue workers in Siberia regularly find frozen bodies that have shed most of their clothing, victims who died in confusion thinking they were too hot. You ask Mikhail if people still die from the cold here. He's quiet for a moment. Every year, he finally says. Drunks who pass out outside. Car breaks down, they're not prepared. Children who wander off. Tourists who don't respect the cold. His voice carries both sadness and resignation. The cold forgives nothing. No second chances. You make a mistake, you die. We teach children this before they can walk. Respect the cold. Fear it. Understand it. Never trust it. The landscape outside is a study in white and gray. Snow-covered ground, dark larch forests, overcast sky. The larch trees themselves are another adaptation marvel. They're deciduous conifers, dropping their needles in winter, one of the few trees that can survive Yakutian winters. In summer, they turn a brilliant green, but now they stand as dark skeletons against the snow, their bare branches stark and beautiful. The permafrost beneath them creates a shallow root system. Trees can't send roots deep into frozen ground, so the forests are relatively sparse, preventing too much weight from accumulating in any one area. At a roadside stop, essentially a reinforced shack with a wood stove and a few supplies, you meet another traveler, a scientist from Moscow studying permafrost degradation. She's worried. Climate change is thawing the permafrost. She explains over tea so hot it scalds your tongue. Slowly but measurably, buildings are starting to tilt. Roads crack. And the methane, there's so much methane trapped in permafrost. If it releases, she trails off, but the implication is clear. Yakutia's frozen ground holds enormous amounts of organic matter that's been frozen for thousands of years. If it thaws, bacteria will decompose it, releasing methane and carbon dioxide, potentially accelerating warming in a catastrophic feedback loop. But for now, tonight, as you climb back into the van and continue toward Oymyakon, the cold remains absolute, dominant, seemingly eternal. The thermometer reads -58 degrees Celsius. Your body continues its desperate thermodynamic battle, and you're beginning to understand that surviving Yakutia isn't about conquering the cold. It's about negotiating with it, respecting it, building your entire existence around the brutal physical reality that heat is precious and cold is patient, and you are, thermodynamically speaking, always just a few degrees and a few minutes away from death. The first thing you notice when you finally arrive in Oymyakon, after 22 hours of driving, including an overnight stop in Kandaiga where you slept in a guest house heated to what felt like tropical levels but was actually just 18 degrees Celsius, is the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the quality of it. Sound behaves differently in extreme cold. It travels farther, crisper, without the dampening effect of humidity. A door closing 2 blocks away sounds like it's right next to you. Voices carry with eerie clarity across the frozen landscape. But the cold also makes everything quieter. Fewer people outside, less activity, a kind of hushed reverence that the environment demands. Oymyakon is home to roughly 500 permanent residents, though the number fluctuates seasonally. It's not a picturesque village. There's no quaint town square or charming architecture. It's functional, pragmatic, a collection of wooden houses and small apartment blocks, painted in faded blues and greens and grays, arranged along a few streets that look more like suggestions than actual infrastructure. Everything is coated in a thick layer of frost. Icicles hang from every surface. Power lines sag under the weight of accumulated ice. It looks like a place where people have dug in and decided to simply endure. Daily life here operates on principles that would seem absurd anywhere else. Take shopping, for instance. The local market, a small building heated enough to prevent the produce from freezing solid, though room temperature is a generous description at maybe 10 degrees Celsius, sells fish that are frozen so solid you could use them as hammers. Actually, people do exactly that. A local woman demonstrates, using a frozen omul, a salmon relative, to pound in a nail that came loose from her fence. The fish is completely rigid, rock-hard, and shows no damage from its brief career in construction. In summer, we fish, she explains through Mikhail's translation. We freeze them immediately. They stay good all winter. When we want to eat, we thaw them slowly. She grins. Or we eat them frozen. Stroganina. You try later. Stroganina is one of those things that sounds insane until you understand the context. Thinly shaved frozen fish eaten raw while still icy. The fish is placed vertically, held steady, and a sharp knife shaves off paper-thin slices that curl up like wood shavings. You dip them in salt or a mixture of salt and pepper, and eat them while they're still frozen. The texture is bizarre. It melts on your tongue, releasing an incredibly clean, fresh fish flavor without any of the fishy qualities that come from decomposition. Because here's the thing, at -50 degrees Celsius, bacteria can't function. The fish doesn't rot. It's essentially flash frozen in perfect freshness. Stroganina has been a staple food for indigenous peoples here for thousands of years, long before anyone understood food safety or microbiology. They just knew that frozen fish stayed good, and that eating it frozen was convenient when heating food required precious fuel. Cars present an endless source of challenges and dark humor. Remember how Mikhail said you never turn off the engine? That's the ideal, but it's not always practical. Fuel is expensive, and letting a vehicle idle for 12 hours overnight is a luxury. So people have developed workarounds. Some bury their cars partially in snow, which sounds counterintuitive but actually works. Snow is an excellent insulator, and the ground temperature even here is slightly warmer than the air temperature. The snow creates a microenvironment that might keep the car at only -30 degrees Celsius instead of -60 degrees Celsius. Others drain all the fluids, oil, antifreeze, even gasoline, carry them inside to keep warm, and then warm and refill them in the morning before starting the engine. This is a multi-hour process. Your morning commute starts the night before. Battery warming is an art form. Some people remove the battery entirely and bring it inside. Others rig up heating pads or use the old Soviet trick of periodically starting the car for 10 minutes every few hours through the night, which means someone has to wake up, brave the cold, start the car, wait, then go back to bed. New parents joke that it's good training. If you can manage nighttime car starts, you can manage a newborn. Historians still argue whether the Soviet emphasis on automotive self-sufficiency in remote regions was visionary planning or simple necessity. But the result is that nearly everyone here knows engine mechanics at a level that would put most professional mechanics elsewhere to shame. You watch a man attempting to change a tire. The rubber is so stiff from cold that it won't flex. He's built a small fire, carefully, away from the gas tank, and is rotating the wheel near the flames to warm it section by section, making it pliable enough to work with. The process takes 45 minutes. He's completely casual about it, chatting with a neighbor the whole time, occasionally warming his hands over the fire. This is just Tuesday morning maintenance. Inside homes, the heating system is everything. Most buildings use coal or wood stoves, supplemented by electric heaters where power is reliable. The coal has to be stored outside. There's no room for tons of fuel inside small homes, but coal at -60 degrees Celsius becomes so cold it can burn your hands through gloves, a strange sensation of extreme cold that paradoxically feels like burning. Frostbite and burns create similar damage, and the nerves can't always tell the difference. People develop thick calluses on their hands from handling frozen materials, layers of dead skin that provide additional insulation. Water is perhaps the most complicated daily challenge. Running water in the traditional sense doesn't exist in most homes. How could it? Water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. The outside temperature is 60 degrees colder than that. Instead, there's a system. Some homes have indoor wells, holes drilled through the permafrost to access groundwater that's protected from freezing by the earth itself. Others rely on water delivery, a truck with a heated tank that pumps water into a large indoor container. You use this water carefully, conservatively, because the next delivery might be days away depending on weather and road conditions. Toilets are an adventure. Indoor plumbing exists in newer buildings with continuous heating systems, but many homes still use outdoor toilets. Small wooden shacks with a seat positioned over a pit. Yes, you read that correctly. You venture outside into -60 degrees Celsius temperatures to use the bathroom. You do your business as quickly as humanly possible. Everything freezes instantly. Waste creates a slowly accumulating frozen pyramid that will remain frozen until summer, when the whole mess becomes a very different kind of problem. It's unglamorous, deeply uncomfortable, and yet another reminder that Yakutia demands constant negotiation with basic human needs. Bathing is a weekly event at best, often at a public bathhouse that can maintain the heat and humidity required. Home bathing means heating water, a slow, fuel-intensive process, then washing quickly in a basin while trying not to let too much heat escape. The air in the bathroom, if you even have a separate room, might still be cold enough to see your breath. You dry off rapidly because evaporative cooling is dangerous. Water on your skin means heat loss, and heat loss means potential hypothermia. The luxurious, lingering shower is a fantasy. Here, washing is tactical, efficient, borderline military in its precision. Laundry freezes on the clothesline into rigid sculptures of pants and shirts. Women tell you this is actually useful. The freeze-drying effect pulls moisture out of the fabric through sublimation. You bring the frozen clothes inside, and as they warm, they're dry. No mildew, no musty smell, because again, bacteria can't function in the cold. Your grandmother's frozen laundry wisdom, if she had any, would fit right in here. Although there's also the more modern approach. Washing machines inside, clothes dried on racks near the stove. But electricity is expensive and sometimes unreliable, so many people stick with the old methods. Children go to school unless the temperature drops below -52 degrees Celsius, which is the official threshold for school closure. Yes, really. At -51 degrees Celsius, children are expected to bundle up and make the walk to school, their faces covered except for narrow slits for eyes and nose, looking like tiny Arctic explorers on a mission. They travel in groups, looking out for each other, because the buddy system isn't just good policy, it's survival protocol. A child who falls in the snow, gets disoriented, or has an equipment failure needs immediate help. Teachers do head counts constantly, and children learn from the earliest age to never, ever go anywhere alone in winter. The school building itself is kept at a relatively tropical 20 degrees Celsius, so children strip off their layers in the entrance room, a double-door airlock system that prevents cold air from rushing into the main building. There's a drying room filled with hooks and heaters where frozen mittens, coats, and boots slowly thaw. The smell is a unique combination of wet wool, boot rubber, and that indefinable scent of indoor heating systems working overtime. Classes proceed normally: math, reading, history, but there's also a practical curriculum about cold survival, traditional knowledge, and self-sufficiency that you won't find in the standard Russian education system. Shopping for anything beyond basics means online ordering or rare trips to Yakutsk, a journey most people make only a few times a year. The local store stocks essentials: flour, sugar, salt, tea, some canned goods, fuel, basic hardware. Fresh vegetables are rare and expensive. A tomato in January might cost 5 times what it costs in Moscow, because it has to travel nearly 1,000 kilometers through extreme cold. Most people rely on preserved foods, frozen foods, and staples that store well. Potatoes are a luxury. Green vegetables are basically a rumor. Yet people garden in summer, during those brief 3 months when temperatures rise above freezing and the sun barely sets. They grow potatoes, carrots, cabbage, cold-hardy crops that can mature quickly. Everyone maintains a small plot, either attached to their home or in a community garden area. The growing season is frantic, compressed, a race against the return of winter. By September, everything must be harvested and stored. Some vegetables are buried in underground cellars where the permafrost keeps them cool but not frozen. Others are canned, pickled, or preserved. The summer garden harvest has to sustain families through 9 months of winter. Alcohol has a complicated relationship with Yakutian life. Yes, there's drinking, sometimes heavy drinking, because the winters are long, dark, and psychologically brutal. The polar night doesn't reach Oymyakon, it's just south of the Arctic Circle. But winter days are still desperately short. The sun rises around 10 a.m. and sets around 3 p.m., if it manages to peek over the horizon at all. The rest is twilight or darkness. Seasonal affective disorder is rampant, though it's rarely called that. It's just winter mood. A quiet sadness that settles in around November and doesn't lift until March. Alcohol offers a temporary escape, but as Mikhail told you, drinking and cold are a lethal combination. Every winter, people die because they drank too much, went outside, and never made it home. But there's also tea, endless, constant tea. Every home visit involves tea. Every conversation happens over tea. Tea is hospitality, warmth, social connection, and a delivery mechanism for calories and heat. It's drunk with sugar, with butter, with milk, strong and hot enough to scald. The tea ceremony here isn't formal like in Japan or England. It's functional, essential, the social glue that holds communities together through the dark months. You'll drink more tea in a week here than in a month anywhere else. The post office operates 3 days a week, weather permitting. Mail delivery in Yakutia is an epic undertaking. Letters and packages traveling thousands of kilometers through conditions that regularly ground aircraft and make roads impassable. A letter from Moscow might take 3 weeks or 3 months depending on the season and luck. Amazon Prime doesn't exist here. Neither does next-day delivery. You order something in October and hope it arrives by February. Patience isn't a virtue in Yakutia. It's a survival requirement. Cell phone coverage is spotty, internet is slow and expensive, but satellite dishes sprout from roofs like metal flowers. Television provides a window to the outside world, though it's surreal to watch shows set in tropical locations while sitting in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. You watch people on screen complaining about 15 degrees Celsius weather being cold, and it's genuinely funny. That temperature would be beach weather here, shorts and t-shirt weather, practically a heat wave. Social life centers around homes, the community center, and the school. There are no movie theaters, no shopping malls, no restaurants to speak of. Entertainment is homemade. Conversation, board games, books, music, the internet when it works. People develop deep, enduring relationships because there's literally nowhere else to go and no one else to see. The community is small enough that everyone, knows their families, their histories, their quirks. Privacy is limited, but so is loneliness. You're never truly alone unless you want to be, and even then, people check on each other regularly. The cold enforces community. Isolation can be fatal. There's a dark humor that pervades everything. Jokes about the cold are constant, a psychological defense mechanism against the absurdity of the environment. Hell froze over isn't an expression here, it's just February. When hell freezes over, I'll do that, gets the response. So, next Tuesday, someone's car won't start, and they shrug. Car's just doing its annual hibernation. The laughter is real, necessary, a way of acknowledging the hardship without being crushed by it. And yet, watching children play in the snow, carefully in groups, fully geared, seeing neighbors help each other with frozen cars and delivered water, observing the quiet competence of people who have mastered an environment that would kill you in minutes, you start to see something unexpected. Not just survival, but life. Real life, with all its mundane concerns and small joys and daily frustrations. It's just that here, daily frustration might mean your eyelashes froze shut, and small joy might be getting the car started on the first try. The architecture of Oymyakon is a conversation between human ambition and physical reality, and reality won decisively long ago. Every building you see represents a compromise, an acknowledgement that you can't fight the cold. You can only build around it, above it, and in spite of it. The stilts you first noticed in Yakutsk are even more critical here, where permafrost extends down over 400 meters in some places, deeper than the Empire State Building is tall. This frozen ground has been solid for millennia, but it's also temperamental, reactive to any heat source above it. Mikhail walks you through the engineering principles while you stand outside a relatively new apartment building, your breath creating that now familiar ice fog. Permafrost is stable only when frozen, he explains, gesturing at the concrete pillars that elevate the structure roughly 2 meters off the ground. Put building directly on ground. The heat from inside melts the permafrost underneath. The ground turns to mud, but it's mud trapped between frozen layers. Building sinks, tilts, cracks. 5 years, maybe 10, and it's condemned. The solution seems almost comically simple. Don't let the building touch the ground. Create an air gap that allows the coldest winter air to circulate freely underneath, keeping the permafrost frozen even when there's a heated structure above it. In summer, when temperatures might climb to 20 degrees Celsius or even 25 degrees Celsius, the permafrost still has a buffer, the circulating air, the shade from the building itself, and the fact that permafrost is an excellent insulator. The deeper layers never thaw, preserving the foundation's stability. But those stilts create their own problems. Each pillar must be driven deep into the permafrost, sometimes requiring drilling and specialized equipment. The permafrost is harder than concrete when frozen, basically solid ice mixed with rock and soil. So installation is brutal, expensive, and can only happen during brief windows when equipment can operate. Then there's the constant monitoring. If one pillar starts to shift because of localized thawing or structural stress, the entire building is at risk. Engineers check foundations annually, looking for any sign of settling or tilt. The space underneath buildings becomes its own ecosystem, a windswept, shadowy area where snow drifts accumulate and dogs seek shelter. Children are warned never to play under buildings. The stilts are structural, not toys, and the space is unheated, unlit, and potentially dangerous. Yet you see storage there. Sleds, tools, materials that don't need protection from the elements because the elements can't make them any worse than they already are. Walls are thick, absurdly thick by modern standards. Traditional wooden houses have walls 40 to 60 centimeters thick. That's nearly 2 feet of wood, insulation, and air gaps. Modern buildings use multiple layers: concrete, insulation, air gap, more insulation, interior walls. Windows are triple-paned minimum, sometimes quadruple, with air gaps between each pane. Even so, frost forms on the inside of windows, creating those beautiful fern-like patterns that are lovely to look at and terrible for insulation. You touch the inside of a window in Mikhail's house and it's bitterly cold despite being indoors. The temperature differential is just too great. Heat bleeds through no matter what you do. Doors are never just doors, they're airlocks. Every entrance has a double door system. An outer door leading to an unheated vestibule, then an inner door to the heated space. This creates a buffer zone where cold air gets trapped, preventing it from rushing directly into the warm interior. Open both doors simultaneously and you've failed at Yakutian architecture. People learn from childhood to seal one door completely before opening the next. It's ritualistic, automatic, ingrained. The roofs are steep, designed to shed snow rather than accumulate it. Snow is heavy. A cubic meter of wet snow can weigh 800 kilograms, and accumulated snow can collapse roofs. But here's the paradox. Snow is also insulation. A layer of snow on the roof helps keep heat in, so you want some snow, just not too much. The optimal depth is maybe 15 to 20 centimeters, enough for insulation but not enough for structural danger. People actually shovel snow onto roofs in early winter to create that insulating layer, then monitor it throughout the season, removing excess accumulation. It's counterintuitive until you understand that in Yakutia, everything is about managing heat transfer. Heating systems are the heart of every building, literally and metaphorically. In older homes, it's a wood or coal stove, a massive cast iron beast that can weigh several hundred kilograms and radiates heat in all directions. The stove is positioned centrally so heat distributes throughout the small floor plan. Fuel consumption is staggering. A family might burn through several tons of coal or wood in a single winter. The stove needs constant attention, loading fuel, removing ash, adjusting airflow. It's a full-time job during the coldest months. Modern buildings use central heating systems with boilers running on diesel fuel, delivered by truck and stored in heated tanks. The distribution pipes are the ones you saw running above ground in Yakutsk, but in Oymyakon they're even more heavily insulated and monitored. A pipe failure in minus 60 degrees Celsius conditions means the water inside freezes within minutes, creating an ice blockage that can burst the pipe. Repair crews work in shifts, 24 hours a day in winter, ready to respond to emergencies. A heating failure in extreme cold isn't an inconvenience. It's a countdown to structural damage and potential casualties. You visit an older woman, Vera, whose home represents traditional Saka construction adapted for sedentary life. The building is low, compact, with small windows and thick log walls chinked with moss and clay. Inside, it's a single large room divided by curtains and furniture placement rather than walls. The central stove is magnificent, a work of functional art with decorative tiles and multiple surfaces for cooking. The ceiling is low, maybe 2.5 meters, which helps trap heat. Everything is wood: walls, floors, ceiling, furniture. The smell is of wood smoke, tea, and that indefinable scent of a lived-in space that's been heated continuously for decades. Vera explains through Mikhail that her grandparents built this house in the 1950s, using techniques passed down through generations but adapted for a permanent settlement. Historically, the Saka and Evenki peoples were semi-nomadic, following reindeer herds and game, living in portable structures like uresa, conical tents with bark or hide coverings, or chum, similar to teepees. Soviet policy forced settlement, requiring indigenous peoples to establish permanent villages and collective farms. The transition was traumatic, culturally devastating in many ways, but it also led to this hybrid architecture, ancient cold-weather wisdom applied to fixed structures. The floor in Vera's home is elevated on a wooden platform, creating an air gap between the actual floor and the ground-level base. This is old knowledge. Cold air sinks, so you sleep and live on a platform above the coldest layer. Heat rises, so the warmest air collects at body level when you're sitting or lying down. This passive climate control, no electricity required, effective for thousands of years. Insulation is whatever's available. Moss, birch bark, sawdust, animal hides, and in modern times, manufactured materials like fiberglass and foam. Vera's walls contain a mixture. Original moss and bark from the 1950s, supplemented with layers added over the decades. When one layer stops working, you add another, she says pragmatically. The walls have grown thicker over time, each renovation adding a few centimeters. Chimneys are engineering challenges. You need good draft to vent smoke and gases, but you also don't want to pump all your heat straight outside. Chimneys are built with multiple bends and baffle systems, creating a path for smoke that maximizes heat retention while ensuring dangerous gases escape. Carbon monoxide poisoning is a real risk. Odorless, colorless, deadly. Every winter, people die from improperly maintained chimneys or stoves. Most homes have detectors now, but older homes rely on vigilance and the traditional knowledge of how a properly burning fire should look, sound, and smell. The community infrastructure is minimal but essential. The power plant, a diesel generator facility, is the most protected building in town, insulated and heated to ensure continuous operation. Electricity is life. Without it, the few modern heating systems fail, communication stops, and the settlement becomes vulnerable. The generator room is always warm, always staffed, always monitored. It's the technological campfire around which the village clusters. Roads are a generous term for what exists. In winter, they're packed snow and ice, marked more by usage than by any formal construction. Plowing happens occasionally, but mostly vehicles just compress the snow into a drivable surface. In spring and fall, during the brief thaw periods, the roads become impassable mud trenches. This is Rasputitsa, the season of mud, when nothing moves except on foot or by tracked vehicle. The village essentially becomes isolated for weeks at a time. Supply deliveries stop. Travel stops. You wait for either the ground to freeze solid again or to thaw completely, whichever comes first. Water infrastructure in more modern buildings is a marvel of problem solving. Pipes run inside heated corridors or within building walls that are themselves heated. Water comes from wells drilled hundreds of meters down, below the permafrost layer, accessing groundwater that stays liquid year-round due to geothermal heat and pressure. The water is pumped up, immediately entering a heated system to prevent freezing. Any break in this thermal chain means instant ice and system failure. Sewage is even more complicated. Septic systems can't function in permafrost. There's no drainage, no bacterial action to break down waste. Modern buildings use heated sewage pipes that run to a central processing facility, or in some cases, to simple holding tanks that are periodically pumped out and transported to a treatment area. The treatment area is basically a designated zone where waste is deposited and allowed to freeze solid until summer, when it can be properly processed or buried. It's not elegant, but it works. Historians still argue whether the Soviet drive to develop Siberia was economically rational or ideologically motivated, but the infrastructure investments were real. The roads, power lines, settlements. They were built with prison labor, political exiles, and volunteers enticed by higher wages and the promise of adventure. Many of the buildings in Oymyakon date from the 1960s and 70s, that peak era of Soviet development. They're boxy, functional, built to standardized plans with little regard for aesthetics but with genuine respect for the engineering challenges of extreme cold. Churches and public buildings use similar construction principles but on a larger scale. The small Orthodox church in Oymyakon, a relatively recent construction from the 1990s, after the Soviet collapse allowed religious revival, is built on stilts like everything else with double doors and small windows. Inside, it's simple, austere, beautiful in its restraint. The icons are painted in a traditional style, and there's a wood stove for services. The priest, an elderly man who also works as a teacher, explains that faith and cold coexist comfortably. We pray for safety, for warm homes, for the strength to endure, he says. God understands hardship. He's here in the cold with us. The school building is the most modern structure, built with government funding in the 2000s. It's still on stilts, still with double doors and triple-paned windows, but it has computer labs, a gymnasium, and proper heating. The contrast with Vera's traditional home is stark, representing a span of 70 years and a radical shift in construction technology. But the fundamental principles remain the same. Don't touch the permafrost. Keep the heat in. Respect the cold. You notice something that seems odd at first. Outdoor light fixtures are rare and often don't work. Why bother with streetlights when they'll fail constantly from the cold? When bulbs shatter and wiring becomes brittle. The village at night is dark except for the glow from windows and the occasional security light on a critical building. People navigate by memory and moonlight when there is moonlight. The darkness is profound, almost solid, a reminder that electricity is a recent and somewhat fragile intervention in this landscape. Building here is an act of defiance and hope. Every structure says, "We're staying, we're living, we refuse to leave." But it's also an acknowledgement of limits. You can't build big here, not easily. You can't build high-rises or sprawling complexes. Every building is a negotiation with physics, a carefully calculated compromise between human needs and thermodynamic reality. The architecture isn't inspiring in a conventional sense. There are no soaring cathedrals or gleaming skyscrapers, but it's honest, functional, and in its own way, beautiful. These buildings keep people alive. In Yakutia, that's the highest architectural achievement possible. Food in Yakutia is survival-coded as cuisine, tradition wrapped in nutritional necessity, and cultural identity served frozen, raw, or boiled into submission. The stroganina you were promised arrives at dinner in Mikhail's home. Thin shavings of frozen omel arranged on a wooden platter, accompanied by small bowls of coarse salt and ground black pepper. The fish is so cold it burns your fingers when you pick up a curl. You dip it in salt and place it on your tongue, and the experience is startling. The flesh begins to melt immediately from your body heat, releasing a clean, almost sweet flavor that's nothing like cooked fish. There's no sliminess, no strong odor, just pure, crystalline fish essence. It's oddly addictive, and you find yourself reaching for piece after piece. This is how we've eaten for thousands of years. Mikhail's wife, Serdana, explains. She's a Saka woman with the high cheekbones and epicanthic folds common among the indigenous peoples here. Her face weathered from a lifetime of cold but animated and warm in expression. The Russians thought we were crazy, eating frozen raw fish and meat. Then they tried it. Now everyone eats stroganina. She grins. We taught the conquerors how to survive. The caloric requirements here are staggering. Your body needs somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 calories per day in winter just to maintain core temperature and basic function, nearly double what you'd need in a temperate climate. This isn't idle snacking. It's metabolic imperative. Fat becomes your friend, your fuel, your survival insurance. The traditional Saka diet is built around this reality. Fatty fish, reindeer meat with thick layers of fat, mare's milk fermented into kumis, mildly alcoholic and surprisingly caloric, butter added to tea, and dishes that would make a modern nutritionist's head explode. Reindeer appears in a dozen forms. Fresh meat when a herd passes through or a family slaughters their own. Dried meat that can last months. Smoked meat for variety. Blood sausage packed with fat and organ meat. Bone marrow roasted until it's liquid gold. And the prized delicacy, raw frozen liver, sliced thin and eaten like stroganina. The liver is rich, almost creamy when it melts, packed with vitamins and minerals that prevented scurvy among indigenous peoples long before anyone understood vitamin C. Every part of the animal gets used. Hide for clothing, sinew for thread, bones for tools and broth, antlers for handles and decoration. Waste is incomprehensible when resources are scarce and every calorie matters. The kitchen in Mikhail's home is dominated by a large freezer that, ironically, is one of the warmest places in the house. In winter, outside is the freezer, Serdana laughs. This we use for things we don't want to freeze: solid vegetables, some dairy, bread. The bread, dense, dark, made from rye or a wheat-rye blend, freezes into projectile-hard loaves outside. You bring in what you need, thaw it by the stove, and eat it quickly. Fresh bread is a concept for summer or for the rare occasion when you're willing to heat the oven for hours and burn through precious fuel. Soup is eternal, always simmering, constantly renewed. A pot sits on the stove with a rich broth made from whatever bones and scraps are available. Throughout the day, ingredients are added: hunks of meat, wild onions preserved from summer, a handful of barley or rice, dried herbs. The soup evolves, never quite the same twice, but always hot, always ready, always offering instant calories and warmth. You eat it with a chunk of that dense bread, and it's the kind of meal that reaches into your core and spreads heat to your fingers and toes. Fish is so central to the diet that the local economy still partly operates on barter. Fish for firewood, fish for repairs, fish for favors. Hunting and fishing licenses are taken seriously by officials but enforced with considerable flexibility. People understand that indigenous rights, subsistence needs, and survival traditions aren't optional. The fish come from the Indigirka River and its tributaries: whitefish, omul, broad whitefish, muksun, nelma. In summer, when the ice breaks up, the rivers teem with life. Fishing is frantic, purposeful. You catch as much as you can because this has to last until next summer. The process of preserving fish is ritualistic. Fresh-caught fish are cleaned, sorted by size and quality, then frozen. Some are laid out on racks to dry in the sun and wind during the brief warm months, creating yakola, dried fish that's leathery, intensely flavored, and lasts indefinitely. You can eat yakola as is, a chewy protein snack, or rehydrate it in soups. As camping food, travel food, emergency food, everyone keeps yakola on hand. Then there's the foraging, the wild harvest that supplements the diet. In summer, the taiga and tundra explode with brief, frantic life. Berries, blueberries, lingonberries, cloudberries are picked by the kilogram and preserved. Cloudberries, called moroshka in Russian, are particularly prized, golden, tart-sweet, packed with vitamin C. They're eaten fresh in summer, frozen for winter, made into jam, or fermented into a tart sauce. Mushrooms are collected, dried, pickled. Wild garlic and onions are harvested and preserved. Every edible plant is utilized because the growing season is measured in weeks, not months. Milk comes from horses, not cows. The Saka people have raised horses for centuries, hardy, compact Yakutian horses that can survive on minimal fodder and dig through snow to reach grass. Mare's milk is fermented into kumis, a slightly sour, mildly alcoholic drink that's nutritious and easier to digest than regular milk. The fermentation process has been perfected over generations. Fresh milk is added to a leather bag containing starter culture from the previous batch, then agitated regularly. The result is a whitish, fizzy liquid that tastes like a cross between buttermilk and weak beer. It's an acquired taste, but it's also a complete food: proteins, fats, probiotics, and just enough alcohol to take the edge off a dark winter evening. Vegetables are the ghosts of summer. Potatoes, if you grew them or can afford to buy them, are treated with reverence. A single potato might be stretched across multiple meals, sliced thin and added to soup or fried as a precious side dish. Carrots, cabbage, onions, these become luxury items by February, either imported at exorbitant cost or pulled from root cellars where they've been stored since autumn. The root cellar is dug into the permafrost itself, creating a stable environment that's cold but not freezing, dark and humid enough to keep vegetables from desiccating. Sardana shows you her preserves. Shelves lined with jars of pickled vegetables, berry preserves, fermented cabbage, salted mushrooms, fish in brine. This is her wealth, her insurance policy against hunger and monotony. Each jar represents summer labor, the picking, cleaning, preparing, preserving. She rotates stock carefully, using the oldest first, always maintaining a buffer. In Soviet times, we learned to keep reserves, she says quietly. Sometimes supplies didn't come. Sometimes winter lasted longer than expected. The jars don't lie. They're there or they're not. Tea culture is sacred. As mentioned before, tea is constant, but the way it's prepared and consumed reveals deeper traditions. The tea is strong, often loose-leaf black tea brewed in a kettle and kept hot all day. It's served in small bowls or cups, often with butter added, yes, butter in tea, creating a rich, almost soup-like drink that's filling and warming. Sugar is added generously because calories are never wasted. Some people add salt, a nomadic tradition that balances electrolytes and reduces bitterness. Drinking tea isn't just about caffeine or warmth. It's a social ritual, a pause in the day's work, a moment of connection. Alcohol, beyond kumis, is present but complicated. Vodka is ubiquitous, partly Russian cultural influence, partly because alcohol doesn't freeze until extremely low temperatures. A bottle of vodka will remain liquid at -60 degrees Celsius, which makes it practical in a grim sort of way. But the relationship is fraught. Alcohol abuse is a genuine problem, a dark shadow over many Siberian communities. The long winters, the isolation, the economic challenges, they all contribute to destructive patterns. Yet in moderation, alcohol serves social functions. Celebrations, commemorations, hospitality. A guest is offered vodka. Refusing is rude. You sip, toast, share stories, and the alcohol warms you from the inside, at least temporarily. Cooking methods are limited by fuel economy. Boiling is efficient, one heat source, multiple items cooking in the same pot. Frying uses more fuel, so it's reserved for special occasions. Baking requires heating an oven for extended periods, making it a weekly or even monthly event rather than daily. When someone bakes, they bake in bulk. Multiple loaves of bread, pies filled with meat or fish, sweet pastries for celebrations. The heat is maximized, nothing wasted. Modern conveniences have crept in. Some homes have electric hot plates or microwaves, used when electricity is reliable and affordable. Packaged foods arrive via truck. Instant noodles, canned goods, rice, flour, sugar, tea. These are supplementary, backup options when traditional foods run low or when convenience matters more than tradition. But they're expensive, and they lack the caloric density and nutritional completeness of traditional foods. You can't survive a Yakutian winter on instant ramen. You need fat, protein, vitamins from organ meats, and preserved berries. There's a quirky detail about ice cream. In winter, Oymyakon residents buy ice cream from the store and carry it home without any special packaging. It's not going to melt. If anything, it might get harder. Some people joke that their freezer is actually the warmest place to store ice cream because outside it becomes rock solid, impossible to scoop. Ice cream sales barely drop in winter because why wouldn't you eat ice cream in -50 degrees Celsius weather? It's no colder than anything else. Historians still argue whether the traditional Saka and Evenki diets were nutritionally optimal or simply the best possible adaptation to an impossible environment, but modern research suggests they were remarkably well-balanced. High fat for calories and warmth, organ meats for vitamins and minerals, fermented foods for gut health, preserved berries for vitamin C. The traditional diet prevented the scurvy, rickets, and malnutrition that plagued European Arctic explorers who relied on hardtack and salt pork. The indigenous peoples weren't just surviving. They were thriving, at least nutritionally. Eating out isn't really an option. There's no restaurant culture, no cafes or food trucks. There's maybe one canteen that serves basic meals during work hours, mostly for truck drivers and workers passing through. Otherwise, food is home-based, communal, shared among family and neighbors. If someone slaughters a reindeer, the meat gets distributed. If someone has a successful fishing trip, the catch is shared. This isn't altruism in the modern sense. It's reciprocal insurance. You share now, and when you need help, others will share with you. The relationship with food here is fundamentally different from temperate climates. Food isn't about pleasure or variety or Instagram-worthy presentation, though it can be tasty, and people do take pride in their cooking. Food is fuel, medicine, survival, and culture all wrapped together. Every meal is a small victory against the cold, a reassertion of life in an environment that's fundamentally hostile to it. When Sardana sets out the stroganina, the hearty soup, the dense bread with butter, and the endless cups of hot tea, she's not just feeding you. She's demonstrating a way of life that's endured for millennia, adapted to Soviet collectivization, survived the post-Soviet collapse, and continues despite climate change, economic uncertainty, and the modern world's bewildered fascination with why anyone would choose to stay. You eat until you're uncomfortably full, because that's what you do here. You eat when food is available because you never know when the next meal might come. And as you lean back from the table, warm for the first time all day, you start to understand that food in Yakutia isn't separate from survival. It's the most fundamental expression of it. The people of Yakutia carry in their faces the convergence of continents and cultures. High cheekbones, epicanthic folds, skin tones ranging from pale to bronze, features that speak of ancient migrations across the Bering Land Bridge and centuries of adaptation to the coldest inhabited places on Earth. The Saka, also called Yakuts, are the majority indigenous group, comprising about half the republic's population. Then there are the smaller groups. The Even, the Evenki, the Yukagir, the Dalgans, each with their own languages, traditions, and survival strategies honed over thousands of years in this frozen realm. You meet Anatoly, an elderly Evenki man who still remembers nomadic life before Soviet settlement policies forced his family into permanent villages. He's in his 80s, face deeply lined, hands gnarled from decades of work, but his eyes are sharp and his memory sharper. Through a combination of Russian, Evenki, and Mikhail's translation, he tells you about following reindeer herds across hundreds of kilometers, living in chum that could be assembled and disassembled in hours, navigating by stars and landmarks, reading weather in the behavior of animals and the quality of snow. We never stayed in one place, Anatoly explains, his voice carrying a distant sadness. The reindeer moved, we moved. In summer, we went north to the tundra where there were fewer mosquitoes and better grazing. In winter, south to the taiga where there was some shelter from the worst winds. We lived with the land, not against it. His hands move as he talks, gesturing the shape of a chum, the motion of packing, the rhythm of endless migration. The Soviet people came and said, "You must stay here. You must send children to school. You must work on collective farms." They took our reindeer, made them collective property. They said the old ways were backward, primitive. The forced sedentarization of nomadic peoples across Siberia in the 1930s through 1960s was one of the Soviet Union's grand transformative projects, and one of its most culturally destructive. Historians still argue whether the policy was genuinely aimed at improving living standards or was primarily about political control and resource extraction, but the impact is undeniable. Traditional knowledge systems were disrupted, languages began to decline, and entire ways of life were compressed into fixed settlements with alarming speed. Yet the old knowledge didn't disappear entirely. It went underground, maintained by elders like Anatoly, passed down in fragments, adapted to new circumstances. The Saka retained their horse-breeding traditions even within the collective farm system. The Even and Evenki continued reindeer herding, though now as employees of state enterprises rather than as independent nomads. Traditional crafts, leatherwork, bone carving, beadwork, the creation of fur clothing, persisted as both cultural expression and practical necessity. Sardana, Mikhail's wife, is Saka, and she explains the cultural pride that has resurged since the Soviet collapse in 1991. "We were told our language was inferior, that we should speak only Russian, that our traditions were superstitions," she says. "Now we teach Saka language in schools. We celebrate Isiak, the Saka Summer Festival, with thousands of people. We remember who we are." The Saka language, a Turkic language unrelated to Russian, was indeed suppressed during certain Soviet periods but has experienced a revival. Many younger people are now bilingual, speaking both Saka and Russian, and there's a conscious effort to preserve traditional songs, epic poetry, and oral histories. The relationship between indigenous peoples and Russian settlers is complex, layered with centuries of history. Russians began arriving in Yakutia in the 1630s, Cossacks seeking furs and land for the expanding Russian Empire. The indigenous peoples were subjected to yasak, fur tribute, and gradually incorporated into the Russian state. There was violence, exploitation, cultural suppression, but also intermarriage, cultural exchange, and the development of a hybrid culture that blends indigenous and Russian elements. Many people here have mixed ancestry and identify with both heritages. You meet Olga, a teacher at the local school who identifies as both Saka and Russian. Her grandmother was Saka. Her grandfather was a Russian exile sent to Yakutia during Stalin's purges. "My family history is complicated," she says with a wry smile. "But whose isn't here? We're all mixed up together, indigenous, Russian, Ukrainian, Tatar, everyone who ended up in Siberia for whatever reason. What matters is that we're here now, and we survive together. Her pragmatism is typical. Dwelling on historical grievances is less important than functioning as a community in present circumstances. The younger generation faces different challenges. You speak with Dmitry and Anastasia, a couple in their late 20s with 2 young children. Dmitry works maintaining the power station. Anastasia teaches kindergarten. They've both traveled. Dmitry studied in Yakutsk, Anastasia spent a year in Moscow and chose to return. Moscow was too crowded, too fast, too disconnected. Anastasia says, everyone lives in boxes, doesn't know their neighbors, rushes everywhere. Here we know everyone. Our children grow up with grandparents, with community. Life is slower, harder, but it's real. But staying requires sacrifice. Career opportunities are limited. Entertainment is sparse. Medical care beyond basic services requires traveling to Yakutsk or beyond. Internet is slow and expensive, though Starlink satellite service has recently arrived, offering better connectivity and a window to the wider world. The young people watch YouTube, follow global trends, wear international fashion brands, when they can afford them and when such items survive the shipping, and text constantly despite the cold draining their phone batteries. They're simultaneously rooted in one of the most traditional, isolated places on Earth and connected to global culture in ways their grandparents couldn't have imagined. Some young people leave and never return. The population is slowly declining as more people migrate to warmer, more economically vibrant regions. This is a source of quiet grief for the elders and a practical concern for everyone. A community needs a certain critical mass to function, to maintain services, to justify infrastructure investment. If too many leave, the settlement becomes unsustainable, services are withdrawn, and the remaining residents are forced to follow. It's a demographic death spiral that threatens many remote Russian villages. But others stay or leave and return, drawn by something harder to quantify than economic opportunity. This is home, Dmitry says simply when you ask why they came back. The cold, the darkness, yes, it's hard. But the silence, the space, the community, you don't find this elsewhere. In Moscow, I felt like a number. Here, I'm Dmitry Vasilievich, Mikhail's nephew, Olga Ivanovna's former student, the guy who keeps the generators running. People know me. I matter. There's a toughness to the people here that's hard to describe without resorting to cliches. But it's palpable. These aren't hard people in the sense of being cruel or closed. They're remarkably warm and generous. But they're hard in their resilience, their refusal to complain about conditions that would seem unbearable elsewhere. A heating failure, a broken-down vehicle, a hunting trip that yields nothing. These are met with shrugs, dark humor, and practical problem-solving rather than despair or outrage. Children here develop independence early. By age 5 or 6, they're expected to dress themselves properly for the cold, to understand basic safety rules, to look out for younger siblings. By 10, they might be helping with fishing or firewood collection, contributing meaningfully to household survival. This isn't exploitation, it's education. Parents know that coddling children in this environment is potentially fatal. Better to teach them competence, awareness, and respect for the cold while they're young. You watch a group of children playing outside during school break. It's minus 48 degrees Celsius, just warm enough that school is in session. They're playing tag, running in their bulky winter gear, laughing, completely adapted. One child falls, and 3 others immediately stop to help him up, checking that he's okay, brushing snow off before it melts and soaks through. The mutual care is automatic, ingrained. They've been taught that in the cold, you look out for each other because any one of them could be the one who needs help tomorrow. The elderly hold a special status, repositories of knowledge and experience. Anatoly, despite his age, is frequently consulted about weather signs, animal behavior, traditional remedies. When someone gets sick, they might visit the clinic, when the doctor is available and supplies are stocked, but they also ask the elders. A particular cough? Try pine needle tea. Aching joints? Apply heated stones wrapped in cloth. Digestive issues?
Fermented mare's milk.
Some of it is folk wisdom of questionable medical value. Some of it is genuinely effective remedies that modern medicine is only now beginning to validate. The gender dynamics are traditional in some ways, egalitarian in others. Women typically manage the household, do most of the cooking and preserving, and often work outside the home as well, as teachers, nurses, office workers. Men handle heavier physical labor, hunting, fishing, vehicle maintenance. But there's flexibility born of necessity. A woman whose husband is away will chop firewood, change a tire, hunt if needed. A man alone will cook, clean, preserve food. Survival doesn't respect rigid gender roles. Everyone does what needs doing. There's a spiritual dimension to life here that's hard to pin down. Orthodox Christianity arrived with the Russians and coexists with older animistic beliefs. Many people identify as Christian and simultaneously believe in nature spirits, protective deities, the spiritual power of certain places or objects. A cross hangs in the kitchen next to a small shrine with offerings to household spirits. Baptisms happen in the church. Shamanic healers are consulted for persistent problems. Historians still argue whether this represents genuine syncretism, a blending of belief systems or pragmatic hedging of spiritual bets. But for the people themselves, it's simply how things are. Alcoholism remains a shadow over many families, a problem no one wants to discuss but everyone acknowledges. Some families are destroyed by it, domestic violence, neglect, economic devastation. But there's also a strong sobriety movement, particularly among younger people who've seen the damage and choose differently. Community support groups meet regularly, often facilitated by the Orthodox priest or local teachers. It's not AA exactly, but it serves a similar function: accountability, support, alternative social structures that don't revolve around drinking. The sense of humor here is dark, absurdist, necessary. People joke about things that would seem too grim for humor elsewhere. Someone's car won't start. At least it's not on fire. That would be wasteful. The temperature drops to minus 65 degrees Celsius, almost warm enough for shorts. The power goes out during dinner. Guess we're eating by candlelight. How romantic. The laughter is real, a psychological defense against circumstances that could easily slide into despair. What strikes you most, spending time with these people, is their fundamental normalcy. They're not exotic specimens or tragic victims or noble savages or any other simplified narrative. They're people flawed, complex, loving, frustrated, hopeful, worried about their children, proud of their heritage, annoyed by their neighbors, dreaming of warmer days, making do with what they have. They just happen to live in a place where stepping outside can kill you, where the thermometer reads temperatures that most of humanity will never experience, where survival is a daily negotiation with physics. And they've chosen this, or their ancestors did, or circumstances brought them here and they've decided to stay. Whichever it is, they're here living lives that are simultaneously extraordinary in their setting and utterly ordinary in their concerns. The cold shapes everything, but it doesn't define everything. People still fall in love, have arguments, raise children, gossip about their neighbors, dream about the future, and find meaning in a landscape that seems designed to erase human presence entirely. The cold stops being an abstract concept and becomes a predator the moment you make a mistake. You learn this firsthand on your third day in Oymyakon when you step outside to photograph the sunrise, or what passes for sunrise, a faint glow on the southern horizon, and forget to pull your face mask up over your nose. The temperature is minus 62 degrees Celsius, and within 30 seconds, you feel a strange stiffness in your cheeks. Not pain exactly, but a tightness, as if your skin is shrinking. You touch your face and realize with creeping horror that you can't feel your fingers touching your skin. Both are numb, disconnected from your nervous system. Mikhail appears beside you. He was watching from the window, knowing you were inexperienced and therefore dangerous to yourself, and pulls you inside without a word. In the vestibule, he examines your face and hands with practiced efficiency. Superficial frostbite, he announces. You're lucky, very lucky. He brings a bowl of lukewarm water. Not hot, never hot, because rapid rewarming causes additional tissue damage, and has you soak your hands while he holds a warm, damp cloth to your face. The return of sensation is excruciating, a burning tingling, aching that makes you gasp. Your cheeks turn bright red, then gradually return to normal color. Your fingers throb with each heartbeat. You now have a taste, Mikhail says quietly. Just a small taste. Understand that this is how people die. Not dramatically, not with warning. Just quietly making small mistakes that become big mistakes. You forget to cover your face. You work too long outside. Your glove gets wet. Your boot has a small hole. Each mistake alone might not kill you, but mistakes accumulate, and the cold is patient. Frostbite progresses in stages, a classification system that reads like a descent into hell. First degree or frost nip. Surface skin freezes, turns white and numb, but recovers completely with warming. Second degree. Superficial frostbite where ice crystals form in the skin and immediate subcutaneous tissue. Blisters form upon rewarming, filled with clear or milky fluid. Pain is intense, but tissue usually recovers, though you might have permanent sensitivity to cold. Third degree. Deep frostbite where freezing extends through skin and into deeper tissues. Blisters are blood-filled. Tissue may turn purple or black. Permanent damage is likely. Fourth degree. The worst, where freezing reaches muscle, tendon, and bone. The affected area is hard, completely numb, and appears waxy or mottled. Tissue is dead and will require amputation. You see evidence of frostbite everywhere once you start looking. Mikhail's missing fingertips. A woman at the store with a slight limp from toes lost 20 years ago. A man whose ears are slightly smaller than they should be. The tips surgically removed after fourth-degree frostbite. These aren't dramatic injuries. They're occupational hazards, the price of living here. People show their scars matter-of-factly, the way someone elsewhere might show you a scar from a childhood bike accident. The medical clinic in Oymyakon is small, staffed by a single doctor and 2 nurses, equipped for basic care and emergency stabilization before transport to Yakutsk. The doctor, Elena Petrovna, is a woman in her 40s who trained in Moscow and chose to work here. A decision that baffles her former colleagues but makes sense to her. "I'm needed here," she says simply. "In Moscow, I'm one of thousands. Here, I'm the only doctor for hundreds of square kilometers. Every winter, I save lives." Her primary cold-related cases are predictable. Frostbite, hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning from poorly maintained heaters, injuries from working with frozen materials, and complications from existing conditions exacerbated by cold. "Cold makes everything worse," she explains. "Heart disease, respiratory problems, arthritis, diabetes. The stress of maintaining body temperature in extreme cold pushes people to their limits. I have patients who are fine in summer but struggle every winter." Hypothermia is insidious because it affects the brain, the very organ you need to recognize you're in danger. The progression is well documented but terrifying in its inevitability. At 35 degrees Celsius core temperature, you start shivering violently, feel confused, lose fine motor control. At 33 degrees Celsius, shivering becomes violent and uncoordinated. Mental confusion deepens, you might start stumbling. At 32 degrees Celsius, shivering stops. Not because you're warming up, but because your muscles have exhausted their fuel. This is when things get truly dangerous. Between 30 to 32 degrees Celsius, you enter moderate hypothermia. Your speech slurs, thinking becomes slow and irrational, amnesia begins to set in. You might try to remove clothing, the paradoxical undressing Mikhail mentioned earlier, because failing vasoconstriction causes a rush of blood to your extremities, creating a false sensation of heat. You might also engage in terminal burrowing, an instinctive behavior where victims seek out small, enclosed spaces. Researchers think this is an ancient mammalian hibernation instinct surfacing as the brain fails. Hypothermia victims are sometimes found in closets, under beds, or in other confined spaces, having crawled there in their final moments. Below 30 degrees Celsius is severe hypothermia. You lose consciousness, your pulse becomes almost undetectable, breathing slows to a few breaths per minute. You appear dead but might still be alive, hence the medical saying, "No one is dead until they're warm and dead." Rewarming severe hypothermia victims requires careful medical management because rapid warming can cause fatal heart arrhythmias as cold. Acidic blood from the extremities rushes back to the heart. Elena shows you her emergency protocols, refined over years of practice. "We don't have fancy warming equipment here," she says.
No EAT umidified oxygen, no peritoneal lavage, no cardiopulmonare bypass.
"We have warm water bottles, blankets, and careful monitoring. We rewarm slowly, maybe 1 degree per hour, and we pray. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it's not." The psychological impact of winter darkness compounds the physical dangers. Seasonal affective disorder, SAD, is endemic, though rarely diagnosed formally. People just call it winter sadness or the dark mood and accept it as part of life. The lack of sunlight disrupts circadian rhythms, suppresses serotonin production, and dysregulates melatonin. People sleep poorly despite being exhausted, feel unmotivated, crave carbohydrates, withdraw socially. In extreme cases, depression becomes clinical, sometimes leading to suicide. Suicide rates in remote Siberian communities are significantly higher than Russian averages, particularly among men, particularly in late winter when the darkness has stretched on for months and spring still feels impossibly distant. It's a topic people discuss reluctantly, with obvious pain. "We lose people every year," the Orthodox priest admits. "Not just to the cold, but to despair. The darkness gets inside some people, and they can't find their way out." The community has learned to watch for warning signs, to check on isolated individuals, to create social structures, weekly gatherings, hobby groups, communal work projects that provide connection during the darkest months. There's also the cumulative physical toll of living in extreme cold. Repeated exposure causes permanent changes. Chronically constricted blood vessels in extremities, increased blood pressure, higher risk of cardiovascular disease. The body's constant metabolic strain to maintain core temperature is exhausting at a cellular level. People here often look older than their chronological age, weathered by decades of cold stress. Breathing extremely cold air, even properly warmed through nose breathing, causes chronic irritation of airways. Bronchitis is common, asthma is exacerbated, and there's an increased risk of respiratory infections. The dry air desiccates mucous membranes, reducing their effectiveness as barriers against pathogens. Historians still argue whether pre-contact indigenous populations had higher or lower disease burdens, but post-contact epidemics certainly devastated Siberian peoples, with smallpox, tuberculosis, and other diseases killing large percentages of native populations who had no immunity. Dental health suffers in ways you wouldn't expect. The extreme cold makes teeth more brittle, and the traditional diet, lots of frozen foods, tough dried meat and fish, creates unusual wear patterns. Tooth fractures are common. Access to dental care is limited. The nearest dentist is in Yakutsk, a day's journey away. People endure toothaches or perform their own extractions with alarming casualness. Elena has pulled teeth in emergencies, though she's quick to note she's not a dentist and does it only when pain is severe and transport is impossible. Burns from heating equipment are another constant danger. Touching a hot stove barehanded, standing too close to open flames, equipment malfunctions, these cause serious injuries. And there's a counterintuitive danger. Because people are so bundled up in layers, they might not immediately notice they're burning until significant damage has occurred. A jacket sleeve catches fire, but the person doesn't feel the heat through their multiple layers until it's too late. Carbon monoxide poisoning is a silent killer. Incomplete combustion from stoves and heaters produces this odorless, colorless gas that binds to hemoglobin more readily than oxygen, essentially suffocating victims at the cellular level. Symptoms: headache, dizziness, nausea, confusion, can be mistaken for flu or fatigue. People go to sleep and never wake up. Detectors help, but they require batteries that may fail in extreme cold, and not every home has them. Every winter, Elena treats at least a few cases. Every winter, some victims don't make it to her clinic alive. There are also the unusual injuries specific to extreme cold. Cold urticaria, the cold allergy mentioned earlier, can cause severe reactions. Contact with frozen metal can cause instant skin adhesion. Pulling away tears the skin off. Eyes can develop snow blindness from UV reflection off endless white surfaces. Even in winter, mucous membranes in the nose and throat can crack and bleed from the dry, cold air. Eardrums can rupture from extreme temperature differentials if you go from outside to a very hot interior too quickly. Then there's the cold-related violence. Accidents caused by impaired judgment, domestic disputes escalating in the cabin fever atmosphere of months indoors, assaults facilitated by alcohol and darkness. Elena treats stab wounds, broken bones from fights, injuries from domestic violence. The cold creates pressure, and pressure finds release in destructive ways. But perhaps the most insidious danger is complacency. People who have lived here for years, who have survived dozens of winters, who think they know the cold, they're the ones most likely to take risks, to skip a safety step, to push their luck just a little too far. Pride kills, Mikhail says flatly. You think you're tough, you can handle it. Then one day the cold reminds you that it doesn't care how tough you are. You ask Elena if she ever regrets coming here, working in such difficult conditions. She's quiet for a moment, looking out the clinic window at the frozen landscape. Every winter, I think about leaving, she admits. Every winter, I save someone's life, pull them back from severe hypothermia, treat frostbite before amputation is necessary, evacuate someone to Yakutsk just in time. And I think, if I weren't here, that person would be dead. So I stay. Maybe next year I'll leave. But not this year. The cold is always there, patient, waiting for the smallest mistake, the briefest lapse in attention, the moment when exhaustion or complacency or simple bad luck creates an opening. It doesn't hate you. It doesn't care about you at all. It's just physics, thermodynamics, heat transfer, the inexorable movement of energy from warm to cold. You are warm. The environment is cold. Therefore, you will lose heat. The only question is whether you can replace that heat faster than you lose it, and the answer, without constant vigilance and proper equipment and some measure of luck, is eventually no. The smartphone in your pocket is a tiny rebellion against the laws of thermodynamics, a slice of modernity in a place that exists at the edge of what technology can tolerate. You pull it out to take a photo, the battery indicator shows 87% charge, and by the time you've framed the shot, maybe 15 seconds later, it reads 43%. Another 10 seconds and the screen flickers, dims, and dies. The phone hasn't broken. It's simply surrendered to the cold. Lithium-ion batteries rely on chemical reactions that slow dramatically at low temperatures. At minus 60 degrees Celsius, those reactions essentially stop. The electrons don't flow, the circuits don't complete, and your $1,000 piece of technology becomes an expensive paperweight. Everyone here has adapted. Phones live in inside pockets, pressed against body heat. You pull them out only when absolutely necessary, make your call or send your text, and immediately return them to warmth. Photography is tactical. You know exactly what shot you want, get it quickly, and put the camera away. Spare batteries stay inside your jacket, swapped out as needed. It's like operating in a hostile environment, which, from an electronic devices perspective, you absolutely are. The internet arrived in Oymyakon in the early 2000s. Dial-up first, slow and expensive, then gradually improving satellite and mobile connections. For years, connectivity was sporadic, frustratingly slow, a luxury for those who could afford it. Then Starlink came, Elon Musk's satellite constellation providing broadband to remote areas, and suddenly Oymyakon had internet speeds that rivaled urban areas. The cultural impact has been profound and disorienting. Teenagers here follow the same YouTube channels, TikTok trends, and Instagram influencers as teenagers in Los Angeles or London or Tokyo. They watch K-pop videos, argue about video games, share memes about freezing temperatures that outsiders find shocking and locals find hilarious. When it's so cold your eyelashes freeze together, with a photo of frost-covered eyes gets thousands of likes. POV. You're wondering if your car will start this morning, becomes a recurring joke format. The coldest place on Earth has become a curiosity for warm world viewers who can't quite believe people actually live this way. Some locals have become minor internet celebrities, documenting daily life in extreme cold. There's a YouTube channel run by a local man who tests what happens to various items at extreme temperatures, throwing boiling water into the air and watching it instantly vaporize into ice crystals, freezing bananas solid and using them as hammers, demonstrating how raw eggs freeze and crack their shells. His videos get millions of views, and the ad revenue actually provides meaningful income in a place where economic opportunities are limited. Social media has created an odd dynamic: physical isolation combined with digital connection. A teenager in Oymyakon might chat daily with someone in Singapore, gaming together, sharing music recommendations, discussing life. The contrast is surreal. Sitting in a small wooden house heated by a coal stove, frost on the windows, while video calling a friend in a tropical high-rise. The world has simultaneously shrunk and highlighted its extremes. Tourism has ticked upward, driven partly by internet curiosity. People want to experience the coldest place on Earth, to test themselves, to collect the experience like a badge. The village has a small monument, a thermometer displaying the record low temperature, that has become a selfie destination. Tourists arrive in winter, bundled in the best gear money can buy, stay for a day or two, take their photos and leave. The locals have mixed feelings about this. They come, they take pictures, they leave, says Dmitry with a shrug. They don't understand what it means to live here. They see the cold as an adventure, something extreme and exciting. For us, it's just Tuesday. Yet the tourism brings money: guided tours, lodging, meals, souvenirs. Several families have converted parts of their homes into guest rooms. It's not a thriving industry, but in an economically marginal place, every bit helps. Some tourists are respectful, genuinely curious, asking thoughtful questions and showing appreciation for the community. Others are disaster magnets, requiring rescue when they underestimate the cold, creating work for locals who have to save them from their own stupidity. There's a particularly memorable story about a German tourist who insisted on going outside in -58 degrees Celsius wearing inadequate gear because he wanted authentic photos. He developed severe frostbite within minutes and had to be evacuated to Yakutsk for treatment. We tried to tell him, Mikhail says, shaking his head. He didn't listen. The cold doesn't care about your Instagram feed. Modern vehicles have improved dramatically with better cold weather engineering, but they're still vulnerable. Electronic systems fail, touchscreens freeze, sensors malfunction. There's a thriving black market for older, simpler vehicles, Soviet-era UAZs and trucks with minimal electronics, everything mechanical, everything reparable with basic tools. New car has computers, sensors, delicate parts, explains a local mechanic. Something breaks, you need special diagnostic equipment, parts shipped from Moscow. Old car? I can fix it with wire and hammer. Drones have become popular for aerial photography, but they're finicky in extreme cold. Battery life plummets, GPS can be unreliable, and plastic components become brittle. Yet determined hobbyists have figured out workarounds: pre-warming batteries, limiting flight time, using specialized cold weather drones. The footage is spectacular. Sweeping views of the frozen landscape, the village nestled in endless white, the contrast between tiny human settlements and vast, empty wilderness. Television remains important, a window to the wider world. Russian state channels are standard, showing news from Moscow that feels abstract and disconnected. Political dramas, cultural events, urban problems that have no relevance here. But satellite TV provides access to international channels, movies, documentaries. Families gather around screens in the evening, the TV a kind of electronic hearth supplementing the actual stove. The power grid is fragile, diesel generators running constantly, requiring maintenance and fuel. Blackouts happen regularly, sometimes lasting hours or days. Everyone keeps candles, battery-powered lights, and backup heating methods. The internet goes down with the power, severing the digital connection to the outside world, creating a strange quiet that reminds everyone how dependent they've become on connectivity. Historians still argue whether technology has made life in extreme cold easier or has simply created new dependencies and vulnerabilities, but the people here use what works. Solar panels are mostly useless in winter. The weak sunlight and constant darkness provide minimal power. Wind turbines fare better, though mechanical parts can freeze, and maintenance in -60 degrees Celsius is brutal. Diesel generators remain the backbone, supplemented by individual coal and wood stoves, a hybrid system of old and new. Education happens both in person and increasingly online. The school has computer labs, tablets for students, online resources. But infrastructure remains a challenge. slow internet, limited devices, technical problems that might take days to resolve because the nearest IT specialist is in Yakutsk. Teachers adapt, blending traditional methods with digital tools when available, always ready to revert to books and blackboards when technology fails. Telemedicine has been a genuine revolution. Elena, the doctor, can now consult with specialists in Yakutsk, Moscow, even internationally. She can send photos of frostbite injuries, EKG readings, lab results. Specialists can provide guidance for treatment beyond her expertise. It's saved lives, prevented unnecessary evacuations, extended her capabilities. 10 years ago, I was alone, making decisions based on my knowledge and hoping for the best, she says. Now, I can call a specialist in Moscow, show them the patient via video, and get a second opinion in minutes. When it works, it's miraculous. But when it doesn't work, when the internet is down, when the satellite connection fails, when power is out, she's back to being alone, working with limited supplies, making do. Technology has raised expectations and capabilities, but it's also created a gap between what might be possible and what's actually available in a given moment. The frustration of knowing help exists but being unable to access it is sometimes worse than never having had the option at all. Online shopping has changed consumption patterns. People order clothes, electronics, household items from Russian e-commerce sites, waiting weeks or months for delivery. The postal service struggles with the volume and the conditions. Packages freeze, shipments are delayed by weather, sorting facilities in Yakutsk become overwhelmed. Yet it's still preferable to the alternative, having almost no access to consumer goods beyond basic necessities. Gaming is huge among young people. Despite slow internet, they play online games, connect with players worldwide, participate in digital communities. The contrast is jarring. A teenager in a village of 500 people, where entertainment options are limited to what you create yourself, playing Fortnite with millions of others, part of a global youth culture that transcends geography. The cold can't touch you in a game world. Your avatar doesn't need to worry about frostbite. Cryptocurrency mining briefly became popular, the abundant cold providing natural cooling for mining rigs, and electricity, when subsidized, being relatively cheap. Some people set up small mining operations, the computers generating both Bitcoin and valuable heat for their homes. Authorities eventually cracked down on unregulated mining, but it illustrated how even remote Siberian villages are connected to global financial and technological systems. Video calls with relatives who have moved to warmer regions are common. Elderly parents speak with children and grandchildren in Yakutsk, Moscow, even abroad. The conversations are often poignant. Children urging parents to move somewhere warmer, parents insisting they're fine where they are, grandchildren asking wide-eyed questions about the cold. Technology allows families to stay connected across vast distances, maintaining relationships that would otherwise fray. The local community center has Wi-Fi, making it a gathering spot especially for young people. They cluster around screens, sharing memes, watching videos, arguing about music and movies. The internet has given them access to culture and information that previous generations couldn't imagine, but it's also highlighted how different their lives are from the global norm. They see videos of tropical beaches, bustling cities, casual outdoor activities in warm weather, and they're aware of what they're missing and what they have that others don't. There's pride in being from the coldest place on Earth, a sense of identity that social media has amplified. Oymyakon is a hashtag, a brand, a claim to uniqueness. Locals, especially young ones, participate in cold challenges, pouring boiling water into frozen air, showing frost on their eyelashes, demonstrating how quickly things freeze. It's performative but also genuine. They're showing the world their reality, claiming their extreme experience as something valuable rather than simply harsh. Weather apps are constantly checked, not for casual interest but for safety planning. People monitor temperature forecasts, wind speeds, storm warnings. Apps designed for extreme environments show not just temperature but feels like temperatures factoring in wind chill, warnings when conditions become life-threatening. Your phone, when it's warm enough to function, becomes a survival tool, providing critical information for planning any outdoor activity. Satellite imagery, available through various apps and services, shows the isolation starkly. You can zoom out and see Oymyakon as a tiny cluster of structures surrounded by hundreds of kilometers of empty white. It's simultaneously humbling and oddly empowering. This small community persisting in vast wilderness, visible from space, connected to global networks despite being in one of the most remote places on Earth. The collision of ancient survival knowledge and modern technology creates interesting hybridizations. Traditional weather forecasting, reading clouds, animal behavior, wind patterns, is discussed on WhatsApp groups. Hunting and fishing expeditions are coordinated via text message. Traditional recipes are shared on social media with photos and video tutorials. The old and new don't replace each other. They coexist, each filling gaps the other leaves. And through it all, the technology remains fragile, dependent on warmth and power and connectivity that can vanish without warning. The smartphone dies in your pocket. The internet cuts out mid-conversation. The power fails and everything digital goes dark. In those moments, the modern world retreats, and you're left with the old realities. Fire, shelter, community, the cold. Technology enhances life here, extends capabilities, provides connection and comfort, but it doesn't fundamentally change the core challenge. Surviving in a place where the environment is actively hostile to human existence, where the margin for error remains razor thin, and where the cold always has the final word. The question follows you through every conversation, implied or explicit, hovering like the ice fog that hangs over the village on the coldest mornings. Why? Why do people stay in a place where survival is a daily negotiation, where the environment is objectively hostile, where life could be objectively easier almost anywhere else? You've asked it yourself, and you've heard dozens of answers, each one partial, incomplete, gesturing at something larger than any single explanation can capture. Economics provides one answer, though it's not entirely satisfying. Jobs exist here: the power station, the school, the clinic, administrative positions, maintenance work. Salaries include northern coefficients, pay multipliers designed to compensate for hardship and high living costs. Someone working in Oymyakon might make 2 or 3 times what the same job pays in central Russia. For some, this is reason enough. Where else can someone without higher education earn enough to support a family, own a home, build a modest savings? The calculation is cold and practical. Endure the cold, bank the money, maybe someday retire somewhere warmer. But this explanation crumbles when you meet people who could easily leave: Elena the doctor, teachers with transferable credentials, young people with education and options. They stay despite having choices, which suggests something beyond economics is operating. Money matters, admits Anastasia, the kindergarten teacher, but it's not everything. Moscow pays more if you account for cost of living. I stay because this is home, and home means something money can't buy. The concept of home is invoked constantly, sometimes defensively, as if the speakers are trying to convince themselves as much as you. But there's genuine feeling behind it. These people have roots here. Family graves in the cemetery, houses built by grandparents, memories accumulated over lifetimes. Mikhail shows you a photo of his father standing in the same spot where his house now stands, and his grandfather before that. For generations, he says quietly, my children are the 5th. This land holds my family's history. Leaving would mean abandoning that. This rootedness is more than sentiment. It's identity. The Saka, even, and Evenki peoples have inhabited this region for thousands of years, developing cultures specifically adapted to extreme cold. To leave is to sever connection with cultural heritage, to become generic urban Russians rather than indigenous Siberians with distinct identities. The language, traditions, spiritual beliefs, these are tied to place. You can maintain some cultural practices in Moscow or St. Petersburg, but they become performative, divorced from their environmental context. Here, they're lived, functional, necessary. There's also defiance, a kind of stubborn pride in inhabiting a place that most of humanity considers uninhabitable. The world thinks we're crazy, Dmitri says with a grin. Maybe we are, but we're here, living our lives, raising families, making it work. That's something. We're tougher than people who complain about 10 degrees Celsius being cold. We know real hardship, real cold, and we survive. That matters. This pride isn't entirely about toughness, though. It's also about competence, about possessing knowledge and skills that most people don't have and don't need. Everyone here can diagnose and repair vehicle problems, preserve food, manage heating systems, navigate by landmarks, read weather signs. They're generalists in an age of specialists, capable of self-sufficiency in ways that urban life doesn't require or reward. There's satisfaction in that competence, in being able to solve problems rather than calling a specialist for every issue. The community itself is a powerful anchor. In larger cities, neighbors are often strangers. Here, everyone knows everyone. Their families, histories, strengths, weaknesses. This creates both pressure, privacy is limited, gossip travels fast, and security, you're never truly alone. Help is always available. When your car breaks down, someone stops to help without being asked. When you're sick, neighbors check on you. When you need to borrow tools or food or firewood, you know exactly who to ask, and they know you'll reciprocate when they need help. Try finding this in Moscow, says Vera, the elderly woman in the traditional home. I lived there for 2 years in the 1970s. I didn't know my neighbors' names. No one spoke in elevators. Everyone was rushing, stressed, alone in the crowd. I came back and never left again. Here I know everyone. When I die, the whole village will attend my funeral. That's worth something. There's a spiritual dimension that's harder to articulate, a sense of connection to land and sky and the raw force of nature that urban life filters out. The aurora borealis, the northern lights, appears regularly in winter, curtains of green and sometimes red and purple light rippling across the sky. It's eerily beautiful, humbling, a reminder of scales and forces beyond human control. You can't see this in cities, Mikhail points out. Light pollution, tall buildings, they block it. Here, you see the universe. You feel small, but in a good way. You understand your place. The summer, brief though it is, provides a counterbalance that makes winter more bearable. For 3 months, temperatures rise above freezing, sometimes reaching 25 degrees Celsius or even 30 degrees Celsius on the hottest days. The sun barely sets, giving 18 to 20 hours of daylight. The landscape transforms. Snow melts. Rivers break up with thunderous ice jams. The taiga explodes in green. Wildflowers carpet the tundra. Birds arrive by the thousands. Mosquitoes swarm, which is less pleasant but still a sign of life. The psychological effect is profound. Summer makes winter worth it, Anastasia insists. We garden, we fish, we hike. The children play outside for hours. The light, the warmth, you drink it in, store it up. And you know winter is coming. But summer is proof that winter ends, that life returns, that this isn't permanent darkness and cold. Historians still argue whether seasonal extremes create distinct psychological patterns, but the people here describe a cycle of endurance, winter, and celebration, summer, that gives structure and meaning to the year. Children are another powerful reason to stay or leave. Parents who stay often say they're giving their children something valuable. Toughness, self-reliance, community, connection to heritage. Parents who leave say they're giving their children opportunities. Better education, healthcare, career options, an easier life. Both are right, both are making sacrifices, and both groups sometimes wonder if they chose correctly. The children themselves have mixed feelings. Younger kids accept Oymyakon as normal. This is the only life they know. Teenagers often dream of leaving, imagining life in warm cities with shopping malls and concert venues and thousands of potential friends. Some leave for university and never return. Others leave, experience the outside world, and return, finding they miss the space, the quiet, the community, the sense of belonging that's harder to find in anonymous urban environments. There's a particular kind of person who thrives here, and it's not everyone. The cold is democratic in its hostility. It doesn't care about your background, education, or intentions, but people's responses to it vary. Some find the environment oppressive, depressing, unbearable despite all efforts to adapt. They live in quiet misery, counting days until they can leave. Others find it clarifying, stripping away superficiality, focusing life on essentials. The cold forces honesty. You can't fake competence when survival is at stake. The weak leave, and that's okay, says the Orthodox priest. This life isn't for everyone. But those who stay, who choose to be here despite the hardships, they're strong in spirit. Not necessarily religious, not all good people, but strong. The cold tests you, and if you pass the test, you know something about yourself that easier lives never reveal. But this strength comes with costs. The chronic stress of cold exposure, the isolation, the darkness, they leave marks. People here die younger on average than in warmer regions. Cardiovascular disease, alcoholism, suicide, accidents, the mortality statistics are sobering. Choosing to stay is also choosing to accept elevated risks, shorter life expectancy, harder physical existence. It's a trade-off, and not everyone would make it. Economic development might change things, making life easier and attracting more people, or it might destroy what makes the community function, replacing mutual aid with market transactions, traditional knowledge with technological dependence. Climate change is already altering conditions. Winters are arguably getting slightly less severe. Permafrost is thawing. The seasonal balance is shifting. What happens to a culture adapted to extreme cold if extreme cold moderates? Is that salvation or loss? I hope it gets warmer, admits Dmitry. Honestly, I wouldn't miss minus 60 degrees Celsius. But I also worry. The permafrost thawing means buildings cracking, roads failing, infrastructure collapsing. And this place, this community, it exists because of the cold, in spite of the cold. If the cold goes away, do we become just another small town? Do we lose what makes us special? The identity paradox is real. The cold is the enemy, the constant challenge, the source of hardship and death. But it's also the defining feature, the thing that makes Oymyakon unique, that creates the culture and community and shared experience. Remove the cold, and what remains? Just another struggling rural settlement watching young people leave and waiting for irrelevance. Perhaps the truest answer to why people stay is that there is no single answer, but rather a constellation of reasons that varies by individual and shifts over time. Economics, identity, community, defiance, competence, spirituality, inertia, love of place. All of these play roles in different proportions for different people. Some could articulate clear reasons. Others just shrug and say, "It's home." Both responses are valid. What becomes clear, spending time in Oymyakon, is that survival isn't merely about not dying. It's about finding meaning, building relationships, maintaining dignity, experiencing joy despite circumstances that seem designed to crush such things. The children playing outside in minus 48 degrees Celsius, laughing as they run. The teenagers gathered around screens, connected to global culture while sitting in remote Siberia. The elderly sharing stories and tea, repositories of knowledge and memory. The adults working, maintaining, repairing, enduring, occasionally complaining, but mostly just getting on with life. They survive not because they're superhuman or masochistic or ignorant of alternatives. They survive because this is where their lives are, where their people are, where their histories are rooted and their futures are being built. The cold enters their bones and never truly leaves. It shapes them, changes them, becomes part of who they are. And they've decided, consciously or unconsciously, that being shaped by the coldest place on Earth is preferable to being shaped by somewhere easier, warmer, more comfortable but less distinctly theirs. The sun makes its brief appearance, a pale disk hovering just above the southern horizon, casting long blue shadows across the snow. The thermometer reads minus 58 degrees Celsius. Smoke rises straight up from chimneys in the still air, dissipating into the crystalline atmosphere. Someone's car starts on the first try, a small victory celebrated with a satisfied grunt. Children walk to school in groups, shapeless in their layers, breath creating ice fog that follows them like tiny clouds. Life continues, adapted and adapted and adapted again, human persistence in an environment that by all rights should be empty, proving that home is wherever people decide to make it, regardless of what the thermometer says. The story of Oymyakon begins to fade now, the details softening like frost melting in rare sunlight. You've traveled through the coldest inhabited place on Earth, felt the bite of minus 71 degrees Celsius temperatures, tasted stroganina and endless cups of tea, met people whose lives unfold in conditions most of humanity will never experience. You've seen how architecture bends to permafrost, how daily life becomes a series of careful negotiations with physics, how community and tradition and sheer stubborn will create warmth where warmth shouldn't exist. As your breathing deepens and slows, let the frozen landscape drift away. The stilted buildings, the ice fog, the endless white, they fade to soft gray, then to gentle darkness. The cold that defined every moment of this journey can't reach you here, in the warm safety of your bed. The people of Yakutia continue their lives, chopping wood and starting cars and watching the northern lights dance. But you've earned your rest from their world. Sleep comes easier now, carried on the memory of a place where survival is an art form, where humans have proven that almost anywhere can become home if you're determined enough, competent enough, connected enough to each other. Let that determination, that resilience, that quiet triumph over impossible conditions settle over you like the heaviest, warmest blanket. The cold may enter bones and never leave for those who live there, but for you, it's just a story now, vivid, unforgettable, but safely distant. Your bones are warm, your breath is easy, your sleep will be deep and untroubled by the physics of extreme cold or the demands of survival. The people of Oymyakon have shared their world with you for a while, and now they release you to dream. Sweet dreams,